Hello, and welcome to this presentation. My name is Siobhan, and I'll be taking a critical look into the book, Lessons from the Lockdown, The Education Legacy of COVID-19 by Dr. Tony Breslin. This book takes a look at the education system as a whole during the COVID-19 pandemic. The author broke down the book into 10 chapters, each obtaining to its own topic. They are in chronological order of the events, which is beneficial to readers as you're able to follow along with the education system during the pandemic. It is also important to note that this book is focused primarily on the schools in the United Kingdom. However, I believe the experiences of the students and teachers are similar enough that educators in the United States can also learn from this material. This book starts with the schools shutting down rapidly in March 2020 and the adjustment to remote learning. It then moves to how parents were expected to step up as educators for their children and the problems that were addressed. Some problems led into the next section, which was inequality that some students faced. Many of the issues addressed in this book were problematic prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, such as a lack of internet, computer access in the home, or parental involvement with their education. After that, the author took a look at a critical view of the curriculum and how it was working remotely for students. Similarly, the author then looked into the high school class of 2020 as they graduated and asked certain questions like, are they really ready to be out of school? Did they learn enough to be graduates? Jumping forward to the fall 2020 semester, we then looked at the schools playing catch up for returning students. After that, there was a look at students' mental health and emotional recovery. Primarily in the United Kingdom, this was very noticeable that students were stressing beyond what was expected during this pandemic. The book also then moved on to the leadership and government involvement in the pandemic. I will not be including too much of this in the presentation since I'm studying in the United States and the UK government did not really affect anything. Next, there was more critical research done about the education system and how it held up during the lockdown. And finally, a look at the possibility of blending traditional education with this new technology. I could continue with the summary and go more in depth, but I don't want to lose any time in the digestion of the book. First, I'd like to discuss the ease of reading. For someone with dyslexia, such as myself, this was extremely important. Comprehension is only possible if the reader is able to decode and read fluently. I found this book fit the bill really well. The author chose a font that was not tiny and didn't have too many curves, which made it easier to read. Next, the author chose to use everyday language in his writing, despite the fact that this was an academic book. This meant that more people who are able to, this gives more access to people who are This means more people would be able to access the book regardless of any post-secondary education. The author even highlighted and gave descriptions for uncommon words. Reading this book also just felt smooth. I rarely found that I had to reread a section because I was unable to read it the first time along. This helps with reader fluency and which leads to more comprehension. The author also included graphs and figures along with the book. Some people may find that they understand the data explained better through pictures than words. Lastly, I found that the author's use of separating his ideas into different chapters and subheadings was really beneficial. Not only for a first read through made it clear and concise what I was reading, but it also allowed me to go back to the book and find specific information during other research. Probably much more importantly than a readability of a book is the information that's included. As much as I believe it is important to provide information to all persons regardless of their education levels, it is far more important that the information provided is accurate. In today's world of social media, misinformation is spread rapidly. Therefore, I believe it is extra important to review information carefully before it's published. Unfortunately, this does allow misinformation that is not published to any peer review material to spread much faster than true information. But what this does is allow people who know how to search for proper information, gives them the assurance that what they're reading is accurate. When I first looked into lessons from the lockdown, the educational legacy of COVID-19, I did look into the publisher to see what sort of material the company produced. This book is published by the Routledge, Taylor, and Francis Group, which apparently, according to their website, is a publishing company that specializes in scholarly books. This gave me a good sign that the book was in fact heavily reviewed before its publication in January 2021. And the author, Dr. Tony Breslin, is a former chief examiner and local authority school provide improvement advisor He is a public policies analyst, an educational commentator, a curriculum development specialist, and governance trainer, according to his personal bio. These are some high-level qualifications, which leads me to believe that his work is factually based. Another good sign for Dr. Brenson's work is the alignment that other studies discussing remote learning. Everything in his book was factually based off of peer-reviewed material, and I have seen many other research articles telling me the same information. So, what lessons from the lockdown did we learn? According to Dr. Breslin, schools and governments need to work together when developing public policy prior to announcing it. At least in the United Kingdom, there was a misalignment between what the schools and teachers wanted for student safety and what the government had announced. This caused confusion for the students and their families and possibly led to a public outcry against teachers. Another lesson is that fear is not easily avoided. While the UK government was trying to encourage some socialization in the summer of 2020, there was continued backlash from teacher unions about the safety of children in schools. Continuing with the government versus teacher subject, Dr. Breslin insists that schools should be making their decisions based off science and not the public opinion. In the United Kingdom and the United States, there were outcries of parents begging schools to be fully in person for the fall 2020 semester. And in the UK, according to Dr. Breslin, the government agreed that schools should reopen since there was, and I quote, growing concerns of the impact of sustained school closures in the upcoming academic year on children's learning. Because the school reopened in the fall 2020, because the schools were mostly reopened in the fall 2020, many parents struggled more when there was another lockdown or isolation for their children. There was also an increase of COVID-19 cases among school-age children. One of the aspects that Dr. Breslin discussed was the teaching lost learning. The issue with this is that schools were not given any additional time to help make up for missed material. They were essentially trying to teach 2 grades at the same time. It will take far more than just 1 school year to catch up from COVID-19 learning. There's also concern about children not having the same social skills that one would typically see. Losing months of their in-person socialization has affected children, and teachers are struggling to keep up with the immaturity in the primary grades. This was especially true, for the earlier grade students. The inequitability that some students experience has been a known issue for years. All the schools do is talk about this issue, but never truly address it. Dr. Breslin stated that children who are unable to continue school because of a lack of internet is unacceptable. This is no longer something to talk about. This needs to have general solutions now. The last lesson Dr. Breslin addressed was the resistance to new technology. Education as a whole is slow to accept new technology in the classroom. This lack of motivation, or ability in some cases, has led to bigger effects of today's education. Teachers and students were unsure of how to properly use online platforms for education, and suddenly they were forced to without a chance to develop it. It has become time for the schools to embrace different styles of teaching. Well, what can we do? We cannot go back and fix the education system prior to the pandemic. However, we can look at the lessons and move on. According to Dr. Breslin, we need to look at the following for education in general. We first need to be aware that how many people it takes. Let me start over. We need to be aware of how many people it takes to teach children. It's not just the classroom teachers and the parents, but also the peers, paraeducators, coaches, siblings, doctors, and anyone who's in the child's life. One thing remote learning did correctly was to personalize the education per student. We already do this for students with disabilities, but COVID-19 proves that we can do this for all students. Next, we need to create a schooling environment that is prepared for the unknown. John Dewey said, if we teach today's students the way how we taught yesterday's, we rob them of tomorrow. This means that we need to do more than just teach arithmetic and mathematics. We need to teach children how to be open and mindful of new ideas. This relates back to how we need to be more welcoming of technology in and out of our classrooms. Schools need to be more developed in understanding childhood trauma and have trainings on how to better support children. Children might have COVID-19 specific trauma, and then they will need time to adjust returning or starting in-person schooling. While many students did struggle with remote learning, there were quite a few students who actually succeeded. These students typically performed much better during remote learning than they ever did in a traditional education classroom. We cannot allow these students to fall back, and it needs to be up to the schools to advocate and help these students continue success as we return to in-person schooling. Overall, I am happy with this book. It reads well, it provides information for both educators and parents about schools during remote learning. It also provides good critical review of what happened and what schools need to do to look in the future. My thesis topic is about the future of education and how to prepare for another pandemic. This book is a strong resource and guide for me developing my own thesis. I would personally recommend this book to any educator or parent of school-age children. I also really enjoyed looking at another country's handling of the coronavirus. While I am a British citizen, I was really only informed about the United Kingdom's policies of entering or exiting the country. I did not have much experience or understanding on how the United Kingdom was handling education along with the pandemic. From this book, it appears a lot of the same tactics were used in both the United Kingdom and the United States. Therefore, I believe it will be a useful resource for educators regardless of which country they teach in. Students from all over the world have experienced the same shutdown of schools and switching to some form of independent or remote learning. Here are my references. I will also be putting them in the description below. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you for watching. Here's my email address, siobhan.anderson-judkins@gmail.com. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions about the book, my research, or any other topics. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.